Chapter 461. Can you show us the other elements as well? Lord Kael suddenly asked, unable to fully suppress the excitement visible in his eyes. Even with his age, his hardened military demeanor, and decades spent on battlefields, the old marshal looked almost energized by the sheer absurdity of what he had learned tonight. And what exactly they can do? The question came out more eagerly than he probably intended. Razeal slowly turned his head toward him. I think all of you are forgetting where exactly we are right now, he said calmly. The words immediately pulled several people back to reality. Beyond the walls, a supreme-level war was preparing to descend upon them. Entire kingdoms might soon vanish from the map. They had drifted into discussing magical theory, like curious scholars gathered around a fireplace. Kael coughed awkwardly into one fist. Ah yes. He scratched lightly at his bald head. My apologies. Even Nyssa quietly exhaled, as though realizing how far the conversation had wandered. Razeal simply shook his head before turning back toward the battlefield. I need to finish preparations first. This time he did not speak casually. The atmosphere around him shifted slightly, becoming more focused. The others immediately fell silent. Razeal slowly brought both hands together before him. The wind around the walls began changing almost instantly. At first it came softly, tugging against cloaks and hair. Then it grew stronger. His silver hair whipped backward violently, as dark mana spread invisibly across the battlefield once more. The pressure in the atmosphere deepened while the shadows beneath the ruined plains slowly began moving again. Razeal's body slowly lifted from the ground. He was simply floating several feet into the air, while the dark mana surrounding him thickened. Then, he began casting. Plague Bone Forest. The words left his mouth quietly, yet the battlefield immediately answered. Miles beyond the walls, the broken ground suddenly split apart once more. White ash-colored structures erupted upward in enormous lines stretching endlessly across the plains. At first they resembled trees, but only from a distance. As they continued growing, their true appearance became visible. Massive pale trunks twisted upward from the earth like giant skeletal growths, their bark resembling layered bone rather than wood. No leaves existed anywhere upon them. Instead, grotesque faces stretched across sections of the trunks themselves. These were silent, unmoving, carved naturally into the pale surfaces, as though screaming souls had been trapped within the trees during their creation. The branches extending outward were long and sharp, resembling spears more than limbs. Throughout the trunks, circular openings slowly formed one after another like hollow sockets. The entire forest spread rapidly, covering kilometers and more. It was an endless maze of pale death rising from the battlefield. No one atop the wall spoke. Even the soldiers watching behind them had fallen completely silent. Then he spoke again. Hellfire Black Lightning Spires. The second spell descended over the battlefield. Dark crimson-black flames suddenly exploded upward from the earth itself before condensing into towering circular structures spread throughout the newly formed forest. Massive floating domes rose several meters above the ground, while black lightning spiraled violently around them in endless circles. The lightning did not behave naturally. It moved slowly and deliberately, as though alive. Each dome pulsed with deep crimson light. Beneath the black flames, arcs of dark lightning occasionally lashed outward into the surrounding air before retracting back into the structures again. The air itself began smelling burned, even from atop the distant walls. Several soldiers unconsciously stepped backward watching the battlefield continue changing beneath Razeal's spells. Yet he still had not stopped. Hellfire Bone Ballistay machine guns. The ground shook again. This time, giant structures erupted upward from both the battlefield and the bone wall itself. Gigantic siege-like formations unfolded rapidly across the landscape, being part biological, part constructed, and entirely unnatural. Massive bone frames locked into place, while dark hellfire burned through the hollow interiors. Long cannon-like openings formed along their surfaces, layered with sharp skeletal protrusions resembling gigantic ribs and fangs. Some resembled enormous stationary beasts crouched upon the battlefield. Others attached themselves directly onto the bone wall itself, lining its entire length. Every single one slowly rotated and adjusted independently, capable of aiming across every possible direction. No blind spots remained anywhere, covering front, sky, walls, and ground. The battlefield itself had begun transforming into something alive. Or at least, something almost alive. Then he finished. Hemolith Vein Network. This time the reaction spread beneath everything else already created. The earth cracked softly before dark crimson veins began spreading through the entire battlefield like arteries beneath skin. They crawled beneath the forests, the walls, and every structure Razeal had created, connecting everything together through glowing blood-like channels running across the ground itself. The veins pulsed slowly and steadily, as though the battlefield itself now possessed a heartbeat. The others watched in complete silence, while the transformation continued unfolding before their eyes. The plains no longer resembled a battlefield. It resembled something born from nightmare. An entire landscape transformed into a living defensive system made from bone, blood, shadow, flame, and black lightning. Even the air itself felt wrong now. The soldiers standing atop the walls could not stop staring. Some looked terrified, while others looked fascinated, or simply lost. They no longer understood whether they were defending a kingdom or standing atop something far stranger. Razeal silently watched the eerie scene spread before him across the battlefield. Even he had to admit that these combinations had turned out far better than he expected. The battlefield no longer looked like land prepared for war. It looked infected and alive in the wrong way. The deeper one stared into it, the less natural it felt. All of it had been created by combining several serious elemental affinities together with precise control. The plague bone forest was a fusion of plague, bone, decay, and necromancy. The pale forests stretching endlessly across the ruined plains were not ordinary structures. They were living constructs, and every ash-white tree standing there possessed awareness on a primitive level. The moment vibrations or movement entered their detection range, the entire forest would react automatically. The branches hanging silently from the trees were not branches at all. They were bone weapons. Each one carried plague-infused bone shards, compressed inside hollow chambers hidden within the trunks themselves. Once targets entered range, the forests would unleash volleys automatically. The bone shards would burrow into armor, flesh, or constructs alike, spreading rot and plague through whatever they pierced. And if any golem fell within the forest, that was where the true horror began. Necromancy and decay would activate together, dragging the remains beneath the roots before converting them into new growth. New trees and new weapons. The battlefield itself would slowly multiply against the enemy the longer the war continued. It was an undead forest feeding upon the enemy army. Razeal quietly watched the pale structures swaying across the plains beneath the morning wind. Then his gaze shifted toward the massive obsidian spires rising between the forests. These were the Hellfire Black Lightning Spires, a combination of Hellfire, Black Lightning, Hellstorm, and Death Affinity. Those towering structures were designed entirely for long-range destruction. The black orbs floating above each spire pulsed with concentrated hellfire, while arcs of dark lightning continuously spiraled around them. The moment targets entered range, the structures would automatically begin tracking and firing. The black lightning itself ignored most conventional resistances entirely. Once released, it chained endlessly between targets, while the attached hellfire melted through defenses directly toward internal structures. Against living beings, it could definitely fry any flesh and nervous systems. He wondered how it would work against golems, though he honestly did not know how strong these affinities were, since this was his first time trying it. As the information he had suggested, he could guess still. Logically, once the death affinity touched a target deeply enough, repair became impossible. No reconstruction or regeneration meant permanent destruction. The Hellstorm layer made it even worse. If enough lightning strikes accumulated within one area, localized storms of black fire would begin forming automatically, following the lightning itself across the battlefield. Entire sections of land could become moving storms of death, which was perfect for ranged suppression. Then came the Hellfire Bone Ballistay machine guns, a combination of bone, hellfire, hellstorm, and black lightning. The giant siege-like structures rising from both the battlefield and the bone wall itself looked almost alive. Their massive skeletal frames continuously shifted while black flames burned inside hollow cannon-like openings spread across their bodies. Each one automatically generated compressed femur shell projectiles inside itself. The moment they fired, the shells exploded into black lightning chains, and hellstorm bursts simultaneously. Bone fragments left behind would continue moving independently afterward, reforming into smaller spike launchers capable of firing repeatedly on their own. One direct strike from those structures would erase entire siege formations. Against dense golem armies, the effect would become devastating. Finally, the Hemolith vein network was the most dangerous structure among all of them. It was a fusion of blood ultimate affinity, bone affinity, and necrotic affinity. These crimson veins spreading beneath the battlefield were not decoration, as they functioned like living arteries running through the land itself. The moment anything stepped within proper range, the ground would attack. Blood harpoons would erupt upward instantly, targeting joints, weak points, and cores. Once attached, the veins would spread inward through the target itself before beginning petrification from within, using crystallized blood-bone growths. If the target collapsed afterward, the veins would absorb what remained and expand further. It was self-replication, meaning the battlefield itself would become progressively more hostile over time. Razeal quietly stood there looking over the transformed plains. Even he felt slightly impressed. This was the first time he had used this many elements to combine his affinities together on such a scale. Now seeing the battlefield transformed into this, it looked less like war preparation. It looked like something designed specifically to erase armies from existence. To be continued. Hope you liked today's video. Join the community by subscribing and dropping a like. I'll be back with another update as soon as possible. See you then.